For 300 years, the galaxy had treated humanity like a strange new power that had grown too fast and spoken too little. And in all that time, no one truly understood what lay behind the sealed borders of Terran space. The great empires of the stars talked about Earth as if it were only another ambitious world with strong ships and clever engineers. But the truth was more unsettling than that. Human colonies had spread across dozens of systems. Their trade routes had become efficient and quiet, and their war fleets were rarely seen outside their own territory. They did not boast, they did not beg for approval from the Galactic Council, and they did not join the endless political games that controlled most of the galaxy. Instead, Earth watched, learned, and built in silence. That silence was what made so many alien rulers uneasy, though most of them hid that fear behind pride and mockery. Then, on a cold cycle that would later be remembered as the beginning of the Terran Border War, every government, every military command station, and every council chamber in known space received the same message from Earth. It was short, clear, and impossible to misunderstand. Galactic Terran space is now forbidden. Any vessel crossing the declared boundary will be treated as hostile. This is your only warning. The message carried the seal of Earth High Command, the mark of the Terran Defense Fleet, and the signatures of the three human leaders who almost never spoke publicly: Admiral Jisoo Park, Commander Hannah Lee, and Council Envoy Yuna Kim. Across the galaxy, the reaction was immediate and chaotic. Merchant guilds panicked because major trade lanes passed near Terran systems. Border patrols demanded clarification. Independent captains called it a bluff. The smaller species whispered that humanity must have discovered something terrible. But inside the towering crystal halls of the Galactic Council, the old powers laughed first. The Council had seen species rise before, and it had seen them fall even faster. To many of its elder members, humans were still young, emotional, and too proud for their own good. Councillor Derek of the Voss Combine openly mocked the warning, saying no species had the right to seal such a large section of the galaxy. Others agreed, but none were more offended than the Empire. Ancient, vast, and swollen with centuries of victory, the Empire controlled hundreds of worlds and believed itself the natural ruler of civilized space. Its fleets enforced law where the Council hesitated, and its admirals were feared from one spiral arm to the next. When Emperor Kale received Earth's warning, he did not see caution. He saw insult. He saw a lesser species daring to tell him where his ships could and could not go. In the throne chamber of the imperial capital, with banners of conquered systems hanging behind him, Kale crushed the data slate in one hand and declared that humanity had forgotten its place. Around him stood the highest officers of the Empire, among them Grand Admiral Roken, a veteran of 12 campaigns, and Fleet Commander Sujin, one of the youngest human-born officers ever to defect to Imperial service generations earlier, though now her descendants serve the Empire, not Earth. But even Roken, proud as he was, did not fully understand why the Terrans had spoken so suddenly. He had seen human patrols before. He had studied their ship designs. He knew they were disciplined and far more dangerous than most Council races believed. Still, he also knew the Empire could not ignore this challenge without looking weak. That mattered more than caution in Imperial politics. The Emperor demanded action, and action came quickly. A reconnaissance fleet would enter the Forbidden Zone, officially to verify the legality of Terran territorial claims. But everyone in the chamber knew the real purpose. It was a show of force. A warning to Earth that the Empire bowed to no one. The fleet chosen for the mission was not enormous, but it was strong enough to crush most border states. It included 3 heavy cruisers, 8 destroyers, support frigates, strike corvettes, and 1 command carrier carrying elite Marines. Grand Admiral Roken placed the mission under the command of Captain Jean Seo, a sharp-minded officer known for calm judgment and absolute loyalty. Jean was not reckless by nature, and when he read the Terran warning in full, he felt a chill he could not explain. He had fought pirates, rebels, and border militias. He had never seen a message written with such confidence. It did not sound like fear. It sounded like certainty. Still, he accepted the order. In the Empire, refusal was death. While the fleet prepared to depart, Earth remained silent. No follow-up explanation came. No diplomat asked for talks. No offer of compromise was sent to the Council. That silence made some observers nervous. In a secure chamber beneath the blue skies of Earth, Admiral Jisoo stood before a holographic map of Terran space with Commander Hannah beside her and Envoy Yuna connected from the Council Station. Across the map, red markers showed known Imperial fleet movements, and pale blue lines marked the forbidden boundary. Hidden beneath those lines were deeper layers of data that only a few humans could see. Sealed sectors, dark fleet zones, restricted shipyards, and something else even more heavily classified. Hannah's face remained calm, but her hands were tight behind her back. She asked if there was still time to stop this. Jisoo answered with the cold patience of someone who had already made peace with war. She said the Empire had already decided before the warning was even sent. Yuna, surrounded by hostile council voices on the other side of the transmission, reported that most delegates believed Earth was bluffing. Some thought humans were trying to hide military weakness. Others believed there was a civil crisis inside Terran space. Jisoo gave a small, humorless smile and said the galaxy had always mistaken silence for weakness. Then she issued the order that would define the next stage of history. Border defense protocols were activated. Civilian traffic vanished from the outer sectors. Beacons shifted to war mode. Long-range sensors moved to passive observation. Deep in hidden docks inside hollow moons and shadowed asteroid fields, ships that the galaxy had never seen began to wake. Their hulls were black, their weapons sealed behind armored plates, and their engines hummed with restrained violence. Yet none of them moved openly. Humanity would not fire first. They had made that clear to themselves if not to the galaxy. Days later, Captain Jean Seo's fleet crossed into the first edge of declared Terran space. The stars there looked ordinary, but the emptiness was wrong. The usual traffic of mining barges, freight lanes, survey drones, and communication pings was gone. There were no merchants, no colony calls, no maintenance signals from orbital platforms. It was as if an entire region of space had taken one step backward and disappeared. On the bridge of the Imperial carrier, Jean stared at the silent displays and felt that same unease grow stronger. His sensor chief reported no active hostiles. His tactical officer laughed and said the humans had probably hidden their stations in panic. Some of the crew relaxed. Others whispered. Then a comm signal flashed across every screen in the fleet at once, overriding encrypted channels without effort. The image showed no face, only the Terran seal and a single line of text. You have crossed the Terran boundary. Withdraw immediately. One of Jin's escorts jammed the signal and cut it. The officers on the bridge smirked. They expected missiles next, or patrol ships, or some desperate attempt to frighten them. Instead, there was only silence again. Hours passed. The fleet pushed deeper. They passed a mining station hanging dark over a broken moon, abandoned so completely that even its emergency lights were off. They found a listening post with no crew and no power, drifting like a corpse. They found an old jump beacon that had been deliberately shut down rather than destroyed. It was all too clean, too prepared. Jean began to understand that this was not a rushed evacuation. This had been planned. Someone in Terran Command had expected an incursion and shaped the entire border to receive it. He ordered the fleet to tighten formation and prepare full combat readiness. Some of his officers objected, embarrassed by what they saw as caution in empty space. But Jean did not care. He sent a report back to the Empire saying the Terrans had abandoned the outer zone and appeared unwilling to fight. That report, carried by relay drones and long-range burst transmission, would be the last normal message the Empire received from him. On Earth, Admiral Jisoo watched the Imperial icons advance across the tactical map. Hannah stood beside her, eyes fixed on the border line. Yuna had returned from the Council Station after emergency talks failed, and now she stood in the command chamber with the same expression she had worn when she first saw the warning drafted. Sad, but unshaken. No one in the room celebrated what was coming. They all knew that once the line was crossed and ignored, there would be no easy peace left. Jisoo finally spoke, her voice low and hard. She said the Empire had chosen pride over reason, exactly as predicted. She gave the order to begin Phase 1. Across the outer dark, hidden arrays powered on without visible light. Sensor webs unfolded between asteroids. deep-range jammers aligned. Far beyond Captain Jin's fleet, something massive turned in the void, its engine core glowing like a star behind layers of armor. Yet, on the Imperial Bridge, all Captain Jin saw was another empty stretch of black space and the faint reflection of his own face in the command glass. He felt the silence pressing against him from every side. Then, for the first time since entering forbidden Terran space, one of his sensor officers screamed. The long-range displays went white. Navigation markers vanished. Communication channels died all at once. The stars themselves seemed to blur as unseen fields snapped into place around the fleet. Jean rose from his command seat, every instinct telling him that the real Terran border had not been the line on the map at all. It had been this moment, and somewhere in the darkness ahead, hidden warships were finally opening their eyes. The moment the stars blurred and the navigation grid collapsed, Captain Jean understood that the Terrans had never abandoned the border at all. They had simply hidden it behind silence. Across the bridge of the Imperial carrier, alarms exploded in sharp red waves, and the calm discipline of the crew shattered into confusion. Long-range scanners returned nothing but static. Internal communication between escort ships began to break apart into broken fragments. One destroyer vanished from formation on the tactical display, then another, not because they had been destroyed, at least not yet, but because the Terran interference field had swallowed their signals whole. Jean gripped the edge of his command console and barked orders for tight formation, engine stabilization, and emergency signal bursts toward the rear relay drones. But the fleet was already blind and half-deaf. Outside the forward viewing screen, the dark between the stars seemed to deepen, and then the first attack came so fast that many on the bridge did not even understand what they had seen. A bright silver line flashed across the void, almost too thin to notice, and one of the lead frigates split cleanly in half from bow to stern. There was no missile trail, no energy bloom, no dramatic exchange of fire. The ship simply opened like metal cut by an invisible blade, and both halves drifted apart as flames burst into vacuum. Before anyone could react, a second line struck from another angle, piercing an escort destroyer through its engine core. The vessel erupted in a silent bloom of white and orange, pieces of armor spinning away like ash. Jin's tactical officer shouted that there were no target locks, no heat signatures, no visible launch points. It was as if the void itself had decided to kill them. On Earth, in the deep command chamber beneath the Pacific Defense Ring, Admiral Jisoo Park watched the battle unfold across a layered holographic map. Each Imperial ship marked in gold and each hidden Terran asset in cold blue. Commander Hannah Lee stood beside her, her eyes fixed and unblinking as the kill zone activated exactly as designed. Yuna Kim, no longer speaking in council chambers but now standing in Terran uniform among military staff, listened to the stream of battlefield reports with a grim face. No one cheered when the first Imperial ship died. They had warned the galaxy. They had prepared for this. But preparation did not erase the weight of war. Jisoo gave a quiet order, and across the hidden battle line, Terran stealth warships shifted position without ever fully revealing themselves. They were dark, angular predators built for ambush, their hulls layered with sensor-bending plates and heat diffusion skins that made them nearly invisible unless they wanted to be seen. Unlike the grand and shining ships of the Empire, these human warships carried no banners and no decorative armor. They looked like weapons first and ships second. Back in the kill zone, Captain Jean forced himself to think. Panic would kill the fleet faster than any human gun. He ordered all vessels to rotate shields to maximum scatter spread and to launch autonomous sensor drones in every direction. He also ordered the command carrier to fall back behind the cruiser line while the destroyers formed a defensive ring. For a few seconds, it seemed the fleet might recover. The drones scattered outward like sparks. Sensor ghosts began to appear, faint distortions in the dark, impossible shapes flickering for less than a heartbeat. Then the humans struck again. This time it was not just cutting beams. A cloud of metallic fragments burst from the shadows at near-relativistic speed, so fast that even the carrier's battle computers could barely track them. They slammed into the outer destroyer line, not to destroy immediately but to shred exposed antenna arrays, sensor dishes, and maneuvering thrusters. In seconds, 3 destroyers lost formation and spun helplessly. One collided with a corvette, tearing both apart in a storm of fire. Another drifted sideways directly into the line of fire from an unseen Terran ship and vanished under a focused kinetic barrage that punched through shields as if they were mist. Gene finally caught his first visual glimpse of the enemy when one Terran cruiser decloaked for less than 2 seconds off the port side of the formation. It was massive, black, and brutally shaped, its forward hull marked only by a faint white Terran emblem near the command section. Its main battery fired once, a concentrated lance of light that cut through an Imperial heavy cruiser's spine. The Terran ship vanished again before return fire could lock. The bridge crew stared in shock. The Empire had faced rebels, raiders, and border states before, but not this. Not an enemy that appeared, killed, and disappeared like a ghost. Jin's communications officer managed to restore a partial fleet net, enough for terrified captains to report damage. One cruiser was crippled. 2 destroyers were gone. 4 corvettes had lost engines. The command carrier's shield harmonics were fluctuating under unknown interference. Worse still, jump drives across the fleet were failing to spool. The Terrans had built the border zone into a trap that blocked escape. Jin sent a direct burst toward the Empire again, this time marked with full combat emergency priority. He reported hostile contact, multiple hidden warships, severe jamming, and catastrophic losses. He urged immediate reinforcement and warned that the Terrans had prepared a full military ambush. Whether the message got out, he did not know. Around him, the battle was becoming a slaughter. The human ships did not fight for honor or display. They targeted command relays, engines, weapons control, and then life support. They dismantled the fleet piece by piece, isolating ships until each was alone and helpless. An Imperial destroyer tried to break away at full burn, only to trigger a hidden mine lattice that had been sleeping cold among nearby debris. The mines woke in perfect sequence, latching onto its hull before detonating inward. Another escort attempted blind missile saturation, flooding the darkness with warheads, but the Terrans simply hacked half the missiles mid-flight, turning them back into the Imperial line. One heavy cruiser, desperate and enraged, opened full broadside on a suspected sensor ghost. For a brief second, the darkness lit up, and that was exactly what the humans wanted. The cruiser's own weapon flare exposed its position. 3 Terran strike craft, almost invisible until that instant, came screaming in from below the ecliptic and buried armor-piercing torpedoes into its exposed ventral reactors. The cruiser detonated so violently that fragments slammed into 2 nearby escorts. In the hidden command deck of one Terran stealth battleship, Captain Suhan watched the battle through calm blue tactical overlays. He had no smile on his face, no anger, only focus. His orders were simple. Break the incursion fast, leave 1 survivor if possible, and make sure the message carried fear. Around him, human crews moved with silent precision. Their ship rolled through black space on almost no visible thrust, weapon ports opening and closing like mechanical jaws. When Su saw the Imperial command carrier trying to pull back, he gave the order to cripple it but not kill it yet. A spread of precision rail slugs slammed into the carrier's engine block, punching through layered armor and rupturing 2 of its main drives. The giant ship lurched, half its stern glowing with vented plasma. On Jin's bridge, men and women were thrown to the floor. Consoles burst in showers of sparks. Emergency bulkheads slammed down across 3 compartments. Jin himself hit the command rail hard enough to split the skin over his brow, but he forced himself up and demanded status. The answer was worse than he expected. Their rear engines were nearly gone. Shield output was collapsing. Marine bays were on fire. One of the cruisers had broken formation and was now drifting dead in space, venting atmosphere from 100 wounds. And then came the message. It appeared on every surviving screen in the fleet, overriding even damaged systems the same way the first warning had. There was still no face, only the Terran seal. You entered forbidden space. You were warned. Withdraw and 1 ship may leave. For a long second, the bridge went silent except for alarms and distant explosions. Some officers shouted that it was a trick. Others begged Jin to accept. His pride screamed against it. He served the Empire. He had crossed the line to prove Terran threats meant nothing. But now half his fleet was dead, and the rest was moments from following. He looked out at the battlefield where his ships burned in the dark, where invisible enemies moved like shadows around broken gold icons on his tactical display, and he made the hardest choice of his life. He ordered full retreat on all remaining vessels, with the carrier turning toward the outer boundary under emergency thrust. He transmitted surrender of the incursion and requested exit under Terran terms. The answer came not in words, but in action. The attacks on the carrier ceased. The humans shifted fire away from the crippled command vessel and instead erased the remaining escorts that still tried to fight. A destroyer captain refused retreat and charged blindly into the dark. He lasted 7 seconds before a Terran broadside reduced his ship to molten fragments. Another cruiser attempted to cover the carrier's escape, launching every missile it had. A hidden human gun platform, buried inside what had looked like a dead asteroid, activated and cored the cruiser with a single magnetic shot the size of a shuttle. By the time the carrier limped free of the kill zone, trailing debris and plasma, almost nothing remained of the once proud reconnaissance fleet. Behind it, broken Imperial ships floated in silence, some burning, some split open, some already cold. The Terrans did not pursue past the declared boundary. They did not need to. The message had been delivered. Hours later, deep in Imperial space, border patrols detected the return of Captain Gene Co's carrier. It arrived alone. Its hull was shredded, its engines barely functioning, its flight deck half melted away. Of the Marines aboard, many were dead. Of the officers, several were wounded or missing. And in its black box memory core, there were sensor fragments, brief, terrifying images of impossible human warships appearing and vanishing in darkness, of Imperial cruisers cut apart by weapons no one had expected, of a border transformed into a machine-built graveyard. When the footage was brought before Emperor Kale, the throne chamber that had once laughed at Earth's warning fell into horrified silence. Grand Admiral Roken studied the data and finally understood what Captain Gene had tried to send before the relay failed. This had not been a border incident. It had been a demonstration. Humanity had not merely defended its territory. It had chosen exactly how much of the Empire to destroy, and then it had deliberately allowed one broken ship to crawl home. On Earth, Admiral Jesu received confirmation that the carrier had escaped as intended. Hannah asked if the Empire would back down now. Jesu looked at the tactical map, where fresh Imperial mobilization signals were already appearing beyond the frontier, and answered with the kind of certainty that came only from knowing your enemy too well. She said no. The Empire would call this humiliation. Pride would demand blood. Yuna, watching the same data, quietly said the Council would likely support them rather than admit they had been warned. Jesu nodded once and gave the next order. Terran shipyards in the deeper sectors were to move to full war production. Reserve fleets were to wake. Border fortresses were to arm. Civilian evacuation of outer colonies would begin at once. Far beyond the first kill zone, inside shadowed docks hidden in the bones of moons and dead stations, ancient Terran warships stirred to life one by one. The first fleet had vanished in silence, and instead of fear, the Empire answered with fury. Captain Gene had carried back the truth with blood on his hands and fire on his hull, but the Emperor heard only insult. And as the wounded carrier drifted into the safety of Imperial docks, a far larger storm was already gathering. One that would bring not a patrol, but an armada, into the dark heart of forbidden Terran space. The shattered return of Captain Gene Co's carrier changed the mood of the galaxy in a single day, because the stories that came from frightened survivors were far worse than the damaged hull drifting into Imperial docks. Across military channels, trade networks, and hidden intelligence circles, whispers spread faster than official reports. Entire fleets had vanished before in old wars, but this was different. The Empire had not been beaten in a fair battle. It had been studied, trapped, and dismantled with terrifying control, as if the humans had measured every possible move before the first Imperial ship ever crossed the border. In the capital of the Empire, Emperor Kale stood before a giant tactical display showing the broken remains of the lost reconnaissance force, and his face burned with rage so deep that even the oldest officers in the throne chamber did not dare speak. Around him stood Grand Admiral Roken, Fleet Marshal Day, Intelligence Director Mira, and a ring of silent nobles who had once laughed at Earth's warning. Now none of them laughed. Captain Jean, pale and wounded but still standing in formal uniform, gave his full report with the calm of a man who had already relived the nightmare too many times. He described the silence in Terran Space, the abandoned stations, the hidden interference field, the invisible attacks, and the black warships that appeared only long enough to kill. He admitted he had accepted Terran retreat terms only to save the carrier and bring back proof. When he finished, the chamber stayed quiet for several long seconds. Then one noble called it cowardice. Another demanded Jin's execution for surrendering to humans. But Grand Admiral Roken silenced them with a single glare. He said the captain had done the only useful thing anyone in that room had done since Earth sent the warning. He said the humans had not defended their border like a frightened young species. They had acted like a civilization that had been preparing for this exact war for years. Emperor Kale did not care. To him, the important truth was simpler. The Empire had been humiliated. The galaxy had seen it. If he did not answer with overwhelming force, every rival state and every rebellious border world would smell weakness. So, with cold fury in his voice, he declared that the Empire would launch a full punitive campaign into Terran Space. Not a patrol. Not a warning. A war. Shipyards across Imperial territory received immediate mobilization orders. Reserve admirals were recalled. Border garrisons were stripped for manpower. Siege carriers, dreadnoughts, and assault cruisers began moving toward the Terran frontier. The order rolled outward like thunder, and soon the stars themselves seemed to shake under the weight of engines coming alive. At the same time, the Galactic Council called an emergency session, because even the old powers could not pretend this was a minor border dispute anymore. The central chamber of the council filled with delegates from 100 species, each one wrapped in tradition, fear, or ambition. Some came demanding peace. Some came hungry for advantage. Many came simply to see if the strange humans would finally blink. Yuna Kim entered that chamber alone as Earth's official envoy, wearing a simple dark uniform with the silver Terran seal on her collar. She carried no bodyguards, no ceremonial staff, no display of rank beyond the authority in her posture. Her calm made several delegates uneasy before she even spoke. Around her, voices rose like a storm. Councillor Varen of the Helix Union accused Earth of destabilizing trade across 3 sectors. A military speaker from the Neral clans demanded that Terran border mines be removed immediately. Another delegate asked if humans had secretly built prohibited weapons inside their sealed systems. Then the Imperial representative, Lord Soren, stepped into the center and demanded formal council support for an enforcement campaign against Earth. He claimed that the Terrans had attacked a lawful reconnaissance mission in shared galactic space. He called humanity reckless, secretive, and dangerous. He said if the council allowed one species to seal a region by force, no interstellar law would survive. Some delegates nodded because they feared the precedent. Others nodded because they feared the Empire more. When Yuna was finally given the floor, the chamber quieted, not out of respect but curiosity. She looked around at the gathered powers and spoke in a voice so steady it seemed carved from steel. She said Earth had issued a clear warning. She said the Empire had crossed a declared military boundary. She said Terran Space remained forbidden and any further incursion would be treated the same way. Murmurs exploded at once. A few delegates laughed in disbelief. One council elder asked if humanity truly meant to threaten the combined powers of the galaxy. Yuna did not raise her voice. She simply said that Earth was not threatening anyone. Earth was protecting something, and if the council had any wisdom left, it would keep its fleets far away from Terran borders. That single line changed the chamber. Not openly, not enough to stop the shouting, but behind many alien eyes, fear flickered. Protecting what? A weapon? A fleet? An ancient ruin? No one knew. That uncertainty was more dangerous than any speech. Lord Soren demanded details. Yuna refused. Councillor Varen called the refusal proof that Earth was hiding illegal military expansion. Yuna answered that the Council's right to demand answers ended the moment it failed to control Imperial aggression. Her words struck like a blade. The chamber descended into chaos, and by the time the emergency session closed, the council had not voted for peace. It had not even voted clearly for war. Instead, it issued the kind of weak compromise that powerful institutions often choose when they are afraid. It authorized protective observation forces to accompany imperial movements near the Terran border, claiming it was necessary to preserve stability. In truth, it gave the Empire political cover. When Yuna returned to Earth with the news, she already knew what Admiral Jisoo would say. In the deep command complex beneath the Pacific Defense Ring, Jisoo listened without interrupting while Yuna described the council session. Commander Hannah stood nearby, arms folded, watching new fleet signals bloom across the tactical map. Imperial mobilization had accelerated even during the council debate. Distant support groups from council-aligned species were joining the buildup. Frigate wings, logistics carriers, scout tenders, even a few battle lines from smaller powers hoping to earn favor with the Empire by helping crush humanity. Hannah muttered that they had learned nothing from the First Fleet. Jisoo answered that pride often learns only after breaking its own bones. Then she asked Yuna the question that mattered most. Had anyone in the chamber looked truly afraid? Yuna thought for a moment and said yes. A few intelligence-minded delegates had heard what she did not say. They suspected Terran Space held something the galaxy was not ready to face. Jisoo gave the smallest nod, then dismissed the staff officers and activated a deeper layer of the map that only the highest clearance could view. New sectors appeared in crimson and blue, hidden shipyards, reserve corridors, dark fleet vaults, and a sealed zone beyond the outer defense belts marked only by silent warning symbols. Hannah stared at it with the familiar weight in her chest. Even now, after years of preparation, seeing that sealed region still made her uneasy. It was the real reason Earth had closed the border. The Empire believed this was about territory, pride, and power. They were wrong. Terran Space had been sealed because deep within it, in a dead system erased from public star charts, humans were containing a threat older than the Empire, older than the Council, perhaps older than every modern civilization in the galaxy. Years earlier, Terran explorers had found the remains of an ancient machine network buried inside shattered moons and frozen planets. A vast sleeping structure that had once belonged to something not fully understood. First it looked dead. Then it began sending signals. Since then, Earth had poured fleets, scientists, and entire defense programs into the hidden zone. The forbidden border had not been built to keep the galaxy out because humans feared invasion. It had been built because careless intrusion could trigger something far worse than war. Now the Empire's pride was forcing humanity to split its attention at the worst possible time. Jisoo turned from the map and issued orders that changed the pace of Terran civilization overnight. Outer colonies were to enter evacuation readiness. Civilian traffic across the inner lanes would shift to military priority. Deep shipyards in the moon vaults of Korra, Hanul, and Suwon were to activate emergency launch schedules. Reserve admirals would take command of the second and third hidden fleets. Autonomous defense moons along the border would wake from silent mode. Old orbital fortresses, disguised for decades as mining debris or dead stations, would arm their main batteries. Across Terran systems, people felt the change before they fully understood it. Freight captains were rerouted. Local militias were called to stations. Families on frontier colonies saw black warships slide out of hidden docks for the first time in their lives. On Luna, on Mars, on the orbital rings above Earth, workers looked up at military convoys crossing the sky like dark rivers of steel. Yet there was no panic because Terran citizens had grown up with a different kind of culture than most of the galaxy. They were taught that silence had purpose. They were taught that borders were not drawn for vanity. And when Earth Command moved, it meant the danger was real. Far from Terran Space, the Empire's Grand Armada gathered like a storm front spreading across the stars. Grand Admiral Roken oversaw the formation personally, not because he wanted the glory, but because he knew underestimating humans a second time would be fatal. He built the fleet with brutal care. There were siege battleships for fixed defenses, fast destroyer screens against stealth attacks, layered carriers for strike coverage, electronic warfare cruisers to counter Terran jamming, and support ships carrying marine divisions for planetary assault if needed. Fleet Marshal Day commanded the main battle line, while Captain Jean, despite his survival, was quietly removed from frontline authority and placed in advisory command, his caution now politically inconvenient. Still, Roken listened when Jean spoke. Jean warned him that the border itself was a weapon, that the Terrans had planned every meter of that space. He said the humans did not fight like any known doctrine. He said they would not defend in neat lines or glorious duels. They would let the armada move where they wanted it to move, then close the trap. Roken did not dismiss him. He adjusted formation depth, added probe screens, and increased long-range drone deployment. But even he knew there was only so much preparation one could make against an enemy built on secrets. Meanwhile, intelligence reports from the frontier brought more disturbing news. Terran merchant traffic had vanished completely. Civilian broadcasts near the border had gone dark. Patrol stations that had once appeared abandoned were now gone altogether, either evacuated or transformed into hidden platforms. And every time a scout pushed too close, a cold signal flashed across open space in the same clear words. Terran space remains forbidden. Withdraw now. The repetition began to haunt even veteran officers. Sounded less like a warning and more like a countdown. On Earth, as the first confirmed elements of the Imperial Armada crossed into staging positions near the frontier, Yuna stood with Jisoo and Hannah in the main war room. Hundreds of officers moved around them in ordered silence while the giant tactical sphere above the chamber showed fleets assembling on both sides of the invisible line. Yuna asked one final time if there was any path left to stop what was coming. Jisoo looked at the red mass of Imperial ships and then at the deeper sealed sectors hidden beyond the border. She answered that there had been many paths. The Empire had burned them all. Hannah then received a secure report from the inner restricted zone, one so heavily encrypted that only the three of them could open it. She read it, and for the first time in days, real concern crossed her face. Activity in the ancient machine network had increased again. The hidden threat was stirring, faintly but measurably. The timing was terrible. Jisoo closed her eyes for a brief second, then opened them with the hard calm of someone who had run out of gentler options. She ordered Phase 2 authorized. That command rolled through Terran space like a silent shockwave. Massive doors opened inside hollow moons. Deep launch tunnels lit with cold blue fire. Warships larger than anything seen in the first ambush began moving from shadow into battle formation. Not patrol craft, not stealth raiders, fleet killers. And as the galaxy's greatest armada formed to punish humanity for daring to draw a line, the truth remained hidden from almost everyone. They were not marching toward a border dispute. They were marching toward the full awakening of Terran war power, at the exact moment humanity could least afford to be distracted. And somewhere far beyond the frontier, in a dead system erased from maps, an ancient darkness was beginning to listen. When the Imperial Armada finally moved, it did not look like a fleet crossing a border. It looked like a metal storm swallowing the stars. Thousands of ships advanced in layered formation, their engines burning in long rivers of blue and white, with heavy battleships at the center, destroyer screens spread wide, carriers hanging behind the line, and council support fleets moving on the flanks like nervous shadows trying to stay close to Imperial strength. Grand Admiral Roken stood on the command deck of the flagship with Fleet Marshal Day beside him, watching the Terran borderline on the tactical display. Around them, officers read out shield levels, probe returns, drone sweeps, and formations spacing with sharp discipline. But even in that polished control room, tension hung in the air like cold smoke. Captain Jean, now forced into an advisory role and kept away from true command, stood at the rear station with a wounded expression that had not left him since his first return from forbidden space. He watched the sensor feeds and said quietly that the silence was wrong again. The Terrans had removed almost every sign of life near the frontier. There were no patrol ships, no hails from border stations, no visible minefields, no defensive wall. It was too empty, too clean. Fleet Marshal Day dismissed the concern and said the humans were trying to frighten them before the real battle. Roken did not answer. He kept staring at the empty dark ahead, because he had learned enough to know that Terran silence was never empty. Across the border, deep within hidden command vaults beneath Earth, Admiral Jisoo Park stood before a massive three-dimensional battle sphere where red icons flooded toward Terran space in numbers larger than anything the galaxy had seen in generations. Commander Hannah Lee stood on her right, hands locked behind her back. while Yuna Kim watched from the secondary command station, no longer a diplomat now but a war advisor trusted because she understood how the council thought and how it would panic. The room around them pulsed with layered data, gravity maps, stealth corridors, drone swarm paths, reserve fleet timings, and deep zone alerts from the sealed system far inside Terran Space. Jisoo gave the final order with the same calm voice she had used from the beginning. Border Kill Grid Alpha was to activate. Civilian exclusion lines were already clear. Reserve Fleet 2 was to remain hidden until phase break. Deep Fortress nodes were to hold fire until Imperial penetration reached the chosen corridor. No one in the room questioned the plan. It had been built over years. Every asteroid field, dead moon, abandoned station, and false gap along the frontier had been shaped into a layered weapon. The Empire thought it was crossing a border. In truth, it was walking into a battlefield humanity had designed stone by stone. The first hour passed in eerie quiet as the Imperial Armada crossed deeper into forbidden Terran space, sweeping with long-range probes and sacrificial drones. Some drones vanished. Some returned useless noise. Others found empty mining stations and dark relay shells that looked abandoned. Fleet Marshal Day smiled and told the bridge the Terrans were withdrawing inward to protect Earth itself. Several Council escorts relaxed enough to break formation discipline and push slightly ahead, eager to claim first sensor contact. That was the moment the trap closed. It began so subtly that many Imperial officers missed it at first. Tiny gravitational distortions rippled through the path ahead. Navigation beacons shifted by fractions. Then entire sectors of tactical space bloomed with false returns as hidden Terran electronic warfare arrays woke all at once. Hundreds of ghost fleets appeared on sensors, fake battleships, false carriers, phantom missile spreads, distorted engine signatures. Imperial targeting systems began assigning locks to ships that did not exist. Then real weapons struck. A dead moon to the starboard flank cracked open like an egg, revealing a buried rail fortress whose main cannon fired a single tungsten mass at near-relativistic speed. It crossed the void in a heartbeat and punched through a Council cruiser, a destroyer behind it, and half the shield face of an Imperial carrier before exiting in a storm of molten metal. Before the shock could spread, an asteroid belt above the formation erupted into motion as thousands of small rocks split apart and released hidden Terran attack drones. They dropped like a swarm of steel insects, each one small, fast, and smart enough to hunt weak shield harmonics. The Imperial outer screen lit up in desperate defense fire, but the drones were too many and too fast. Destroyers began losing engines, turrets, and sensor masts in the first minutes. One battleship survived 3 torpedo impacts only to have its shield projectors stripped by drone cutters, leaving it open for the next wave. Grand Admiral Roken roared orders to tighten formation, collapse the flanks, and bring electronic warfare cruisers forward, but the Terrans had planned for that too. Hidden jamming towers buried inside drifting debris activated in sequence, each one flooding local space with rotating interference patterns that made Imperial coordination stutter and fail. Carrier wings launched by the hundreds, filling the dark with Imperial strike craft, but Terran stealth interceptors came from impossible angles, below, above, and even from cold drift positions that had looked like dead wreckage moments earlier. The human pilots did not dogfight for glory. They cut engines, used debris shadows, and killed support craft first, blinding formations before ripping through bombers. On the Terran side, Captain Suhan commanded one of the black stealth battleships from a hidden attack lane between 2 shattered moons. His crew moved in almost total silence, trusting the battle net and years of training. When the Imperial line shifted inward exactly as predicted, Su gave the release order. 3 Terran cruisers decloaked for just 4 seconds in the heart of the confusion, fired synchronized spinal lances into the lead siege battleships, and vanished again. 2 Imperial capital ships were gutted through their reactor spines before anyone got a clean lock. A third tried to roll and return fire, only to drift into a preceded mine curtain that erupted along its ventral hull. Explosions rippled across its armor in a chain so violent that its forward third broke away and spun off like a dead blade. On Roken's flagship, Fleet Marshal Day finally understood that they were not in a battle. They were inside a machine built to dismantle fleets. He ordered full forward thrust toward the nearest stable vector, hoping brute momentum could punch through the kill zone, but Jisoo had expected that instinct. Hidden gravity anchors buried inside the field activated, creating sudden distortions that pulled sections of the armada off their ideal lines. Ships that were too close drifted into one another. A council carrier clipped an Imperial cruiser and lost half its flight deck. A destroyer squadron trying to realign entered the firing lane of its own rear battleships. Chaos spread in widening circles. Yet the Empire was still powerful, and for all the losses it kept moving. Grand Admiral Roken refused to break. He ordered the main battle line to target any visible Terran source no matter the cost. And when one black human battlecruiser briefly appeared near the port axis, the flagship and 2 escorts unleashed a full heavy broadside. The void flashed white. One of the Terran ships took a direct hit, its shield shell cracking in brilliant arcs before the vessel vanished behind a curtain of defensive chaff and false heat ghosts. It was the first visible proof that humans could bleed too, and for a moment Imperial morale surged. Fleet Marshal Day shouted that the Terrans were not gods. But Jisoo had held back the true hammer for exactly this point. When the Imperial Armada pushed past the outer kill layers and began committing its deepest reserves, she authorized phase break. All across the hidden border systems, vast structures woke from disguise. What had seemed like dead industrial rings around barren moons rotated open to reveal spinal cannons the length of cities. What had looked like hollowed mining platforms powered up as missile citadels. Entire asteroid clusters split apart and reassembled into autonomous gun swarms. Then the inner Terran war fleets emerged. They did not arrive from a single direction like ordinary reinforcements. They rose from black launch tunnels inside moons, from shadow docks behind gas giant rings, from false wreck fields that had hidden them for decades. Massive dreadnoughts, stealth carriers, armored missile barges, and brutal line battleships slid into open combat formation under the Terran flag. The first time many Imperial crews truly saw them, fear hit like ice. These were not the raiders from the first ambush. These were fleet killers built for one purpose, to end invasions. Commander Hannah watched their icons bloom across the tactical sphere and quietly said the Empire had crossed the last safe line. Jisoo answered by transmitting one final open band message to every ship in the battle zone. You were warned. Withdraw now or be destroyed. No one withdrew. Pride, momentum, confusion, and simple inability to escape locked the Armada in place. So the Terrans opened fire. The battle became a slaughter on a scale the galaxy would speak about for centuries. Terran dreadnoughts used predictive firing grids fed by hidden sensor webs, striking where Imperial ships would be seconds before they arrived. Missile clouds moved like storms, each warhead adjusting in flight to new shield harmonics. Boarding pods slammed into crippled capital ships, and Terran Marines in black armor carved through corridors with brutal speed, seizing command cores and venting resistance into space. One Council flagship tried to surrender but was caught in the crossfire when its own panicked escorts rammed it during a retreat turn. Another support fleet broke formation entirely and fled, only to run straight into a secondary kill corridor seeded with silent torpedoes. Grand Admiral Roken, bleeding from a cut above one eye after a near hit shook the flagship, refused evacuation and kept commanding through the collapse. He was not foolish enough to think victory remained, but he believed he could still carve a path toward the Terran inner routes and strike something that mattered. He set a direct spearhead for the route intelligence believed led toward Earth, dragging the surviving core battleships with him in a desperate push. For a few terrible minutes it almost worked. Imperial heavy guns cleared a corridor through drone swarms. 2 Terran cruisers died under concentrated fire. A hidden gun platform was destroyed when a damaged carrier rammed it rather than surrender. The spearhead broke through the last outer fortress line and entered a dark region of space that looked strangely open. Captain Jean saw that empty zone on the tactical screen and his blood ran cold. He knew the pattern now. Open space inside Terran territory was never truly open. He shouted a warning, but it was too late. Far ahead, in the heart of that dark corridor, something enormous powered on. At first it looked like a small moon turning. Then light crawled across a hull so vast that several officers thought it was a station. It was neither. It was an ancient Terran warship, a colossal dreadnought hidden in deep silence, larger than any known Imperial flagship and armored like a moving fortress. Its surface was layered in black plates and old battle scars, and along its spine ran a weapon channel that glowed with rising white fire. Even Grand Admiral Roken, who had seen centuries of fleet doctrine and every known capital design in the Empire's archives, stared in stunned disbelief. On Earth, Yuna whispered the ship's name from an old sealed briefing she had hoped never to hear spoken in war. It was one of the old Guardians, a relic of a forgotten Terran age, held in reserve only for extinction-level threats. Jisu had not wanted to wake it, but the Empire had pushed too far. The giant dreadnought fired once. The beam that erupted from its spine did not merely strike Roken's flagship. It erased it. Shields collapsed in less than a second. Armor peeled away in white vapor. The command core flashed, folded, and vanished in a storm of plasma so bright that nearby ships lost visual feeds. 2 escort battleships behind the flagship were cut open by the overspill. When the light faded, the center of the Imperial spearhead was simply gone. Fleet Marshal Day died without even enough wreckage left to mark his place. The surviving armada broke. Discipline shattered. Council captains screamed conflicting orders. Destroyers ran. Carriers dumped escape pods. Battleships tried to reverse under fire. Some attempted surrender. Others kept shooting in blind terror. The Terrans did not chase recklessly. They harvested. They cut engines, boxed retreat lanes, and destroyed only what still resisted. By the time the last coherent Imperial signal withdrew toward the border, the myth of Imperial invincibility had been burned out of the stars. In the command chamber beneath Earth, the battle sphere slowly shifted from red to scattered fragments of gold fleeing in every direction. Hannah let out the breath she had been holding for what felt like hours. Yuna stared at the display with a mixture of relief and dread, because victory had come, but at a terrible cost, and not only in ships. Jisu did not celebrate. She looked instead toward the deeper sealed sectors on the hidden layer of the map, where new warning markers were beginning to blink from the ancient machine zone. The Empire had come to punish humanity and had broken itself against Terran steel, but in forcing this war, it had done something even more dangerous. It had drawn human fleets away from the real threat. And as burning Imperial wrecks drifted in silence across the ruined border systems, the greatest Terran victory in generations carried with it a darker truth. The battle they had just won might have been only a distraction from the one they could not afford to lose. After the battle, the silence that followed across the Terran border systems was heavier than the fighting itself, because what remained of the Imperial Armada no longer looked like the force that had marched so proudly into forbidden space. Broken battleships drifted with their hulls torn open, shattered carriers spun without power, escape pods floated between burning debris, and the few surviving Council escorts fled in scattered panic towards safer stars. The Empire had come to crush humanity in one overwhelming strike, and instead it had left behind a graveyard so large that even distant observers could see the flashes of secondary explosions from light hours away. Across the galaxy, trade networks froze, military analysts worked without sleep, and entire worlds watched raw battle fragments leak onto public channels. The great empire, the power that had ruled through fear for centuries, had been broken in a single campaign. On Earth, however, there was no celebration in the deep command chamber beneath the Pacific Defense Ring. Admiral Jisu Park stood before the battle sphere while Commander Hannah Lee and Yuna Kim studied the deeper tactical layers, and all three of them understood that the war at the border had only solved one danger while making another worse. In the sealed dead system hidden far beyond the public maps, the ancient machine network was waking faster now. The old warning markers that had once blinked slowly were now flashing in clusters. Deep sensor buoys reported fresh energy surges beneath shattered moons. Dormant structures buried in ice had begun rotating for the first time in centuries. The thing humanity had been hiding from the galaxy, and protecting the galaxy from, was no longer just whispering. It was listening. Jisu ordered the border fleets to begin immediate recovery and selective mercy operations. Any Imperial or Council ship that had powered down weapons and transmitted surrender was to be disarmed, boarded, and taken under Terran custody. Any ship that continued resistance would be destroyed. Terran rescue craft moved through the wreck field with cold efficiency, pulling survivors from broken hulls, locking down reactors, and collecting black box cores from destroyed enemy command vessels. Human medics treated wounded aliens beside wounded humans, but the crews worked under heavy guard because no one trusted what desperate survivors might do. Captain Suhan, still aboard his stealth battleship, directed salvage and prisoner transfer while his Marines secured the larger wrecks. He walked through a captured Imperial cruiser where fires still burned behind sealed bulkheads and found crews staring at him not with hatred, but with disbelief. Many of them had expected humans to execute every survivor after such a defeat. Instead, they found disciplined soldiers who gave water, patched wounds, and then took away weapons without a word. That cold control frightened them more than cruelty would have. Far away on the damaged edge of the battlefield, Captain Jean Seo stood on the bridge of a rescue shuttle under Terran guard, looking through cracked viewports at the ruin of the fleet he had once tried to save. He had survived only because his command had been transferred off the Imperial spearhead after his earlier warning, and now he understood that the Terrans had allowed his first survival for a reason. They had needed the Empire to see the truth, and the Empire had answered with arrogance anyway. He felt no pride left, only exhaustion. In the Imperial capital, the return of scattered survivors hit like a political earthquake. Emperor Kale had not died in battle, but the destruction of Grand Admiral Roken, Fleet Marshal Day, and most of the main war line shattered the myth that Imperial force could solve any problem. Noble houses blamed one another. Border governors began withholding taxes and ships. Old rival commanders who had stayed behind on secondary assignments suddenly spoke in cautious tones about leadership failure. Worse, whole sectors that had long feared the Empire began to whisper about independence. On the outer worlds, some governors openly asked why they should keep bleeding for a throne that had led the greatest fleet in living memory into a human trap. Kale raged in private chambers, smashing reports and screaming for emergency mobilization, but even his surviving advisors knew the truth. There was no second armada ready to replace the first. The Empire could still fight, but not like before. Its aura of invincibility was gone. In the Galactic Council, panic turned to blame with almost comic speed. Delegates who had quietly supported the Imperial campaign now claimed they had urged caution. Councillor Varen denied ever backing armed pressure. Lord Soren, the Imperial representative, vanished from public view. Smaller species demanded to know why they had been pushed into escorting a war that had become a massacre. The council chamber, once full of smug certainty, now sounded like frightened animals trying to outrun a storm. When Yuna returned there under safe passage, she did not come alone this time. Behind her, on the chamber displays, floated the image of the ruined border battlefield and the cold tactical evidence of how many warnings Earth had sent before the invasion. She stood in the center while the chamber quieted, not because they respected her now, but because they feared what humanity might say next. A council elder, pale and trembling, asked the question everyone had been avoiding since the war began. Why had Earth really sealed Terran Space? Why had humanity been willing to risk galactic war rather than simply explain itself? For the first time, Yuna did not refuse the answer. She said the Terrans had remained silent because the truth was too dangerous to reveal while the border still held. She said that deep inside forbidden Terran Space, in a dead system erased from open maps, human explorers had discovered the remains of an ancient machine civilization older than every modern empire in the chamber. At first, the ruins had seemed lifeless. Then they began sending structured signals. The machines were buried across moons, planets, and artificial shells the size of cities. Some were broken, some were dormant, some were waiting. Humanity had spent years building sealed fleets, hidden fortresses, and forbidden corridors not to prepare conquest, but to contain the possibility that those machines could wake and spread. She explained that Earth had closed the border because careless intrusion, uncontrolled scans, heavy reactor signatures, and large-scale military operations near the sealed sectors increased the network's activity. The Empire's invasion had done exactly that. It had shaken the cage. At first, the chamber did not react. Then disbelief erupted. Some called it a lie invented to justify Terran militarization. Others demanded proof. Yuna, who had been told by Jisoo exactly how much to reveal and no more, gave them proof in carefully selected pieces. Sensor logs, ancient structural scans, signal patterns that no modern species could have created. Energy spikes recorded before and after the Imperial invasion. A timeline showing how each escalation in military traffic near the sealed routes caused the machine network to respond. The chamber fell into horrified silence. Counselor Varen tried to ask why humanity had not shared this discovery sooner, but Yuna cut him off with a calm that felt like judgment itself. She said Earth had asked for distance, not help. Earth had drawn one line and offered one warning. The Council had chosen politics over wisdom, and the Empire had chosen pride over survival. On Earth, while Yuna spoke to the frightened galaxy, Jisoo and Hannah were already acting. The border war fleets were not returning home in triumph. They were turning inward, redirecting toward the hidden dead system. Massive Terran dreadnoughts that had just destroyed the Imperial Armada were now racing through sealed jump corridors toward the real front. Rescue operations at the border continued, but only enough to stabilize prisoners and salvage critical materials. Every spare ship, every autonomous platform, every reserve Marine battalion was being pulled toward the machine zone. In orbit above Earth, civilians watched dark fleets cross the sky in endless formation, and for the first time the Terran government released a carefully shaped public statement. It did not reveal every secret, but it told citizens enough. The border war had been won, yet the greater danger remained active. There would be no victory parades, no holidays, no speeches of triumph. Humanity had been forced to fight a war it never wanted, and now it had to finish the task that had started all of it. In the Imperial capital, Kale received Yuna's council transmission and finally understood the scale of his mistake, though not enough to admit it. His first instinct was denial, but the surviving scientists and intelligence staff who studied the evidence could not dismiss it. The signal patterns were real. The energy surges were real. Worse, frontier probes were already detecting strange bursts near the sealed sectors, as if something beneath Terran Space had begun answering the noise of war. Some of Kale's advisors urged him to offer immediate peace and send technical aid. Others urged him to prepare defensive lines in case the Terrans turned their surviving fleets outward in anger. Kale wanted revenge, but for the first time in his reign, revenge was not the strongest force in the room. Fear was. Meanwhile, among the broken remnants of Imperial survivors held under Terran custody, Captain Jean found himself face to face with Admiral Jisoo aboard a mobile command carrier, moving toward the sealed system. He expected interrogation, maybe even execution. Instead, Jisoo offered him a choice. He could remain a prisoner and survive the coming battle under guard, or he could help interpret Imperial signal doctrine and outer sector military routes in case the crisis spread beyond Terran borders. Jean stared at her in disbelief. After everything, the humans were still thinking about the larger picture. Jisoo told him a simple truth. The border war had never been the real problem. It had been a delay. If the machine network woke fully, Imperial borders, Council law, and human pride would all mean nothing. Jean agreed to help, not because he had changed sides, but because he had seen too much to cling to old illusions. As Terran fleets entered the dead system, the scale of the hidden threat finally became visible even to hardened officers. Broken moons floated around a cold, dim star, but inside those moons were artificial lattices bigger than cities. Frozen planets carried ring-shaped scars where ancient mining or construction had once cut deep into their crusts. Black structures, long mistaken for debris, were slowly unfolding in the dark. Signals pulsed from beneath the ice in repeating mathematical patterns, cold and patient. Commander Hannah oversaw the first containment line while engineers rushed to reinforce dormant barriers and restart suppression arrays. The old Guardian dreadnought from the border battle took position near the central fracture zone, its vast hull turning like a fortress preparing to block the end of the world. Jisoo stood on the command deck and watched as new contacts appeared one by one beneath the crust of the innermost moon. They were not fully active yet, but they were moving. The Empire had not only invaded forbidden space, it had almost awakened something ancient enough to erase the meaning of Empire itself. Back in the Council chamber, Yuna delivered Earth's final declaration. The Empire would be formally disarmed along Terran-adjacent sectors until a new security order could be enforced. No Council military vessel would enter designated human containment zones without Terran approval. Protected corridors would be established under Terran fleet control. Any government that challenged these terms would be treated as a direct threat to galactic survival. Some delegates wanted to protest. None truly dared. They had seen the graveyard at the border. They had heard the evidence. They knew that whether they liked it or not, humanity now held the strongest fleets, the clearest purpose, and the only working understanding of the danger ahead. Across the galaxy, people watched as Terran warships crossed beyond their old borders not as conquerors in the usual sense, but as armed wardens of a crisis no one else had been prepared to face. Some called them saviors. Others called them tyrants wrapped in duty. Both sides feared them. On the bridge of the old Guardian dreadnought, as the dead system's darkness stirred and ancient lights began to blink beneath frozen stone, Admiral Jassu gave the order to lock all containment lines and prepare for first contact with the machine network if suppression failed. Behind her, Hannah and Eunice stood in silence, knowing the border war had only been the beginning of a much larger age. Humanity had warned the galaxy. The galaxy had laughed, then bled, and now it watched Terran fleets take command of the stars they once tried only to defend. And as the first deep tremor rolled through the dead moon and a signal older than history echoed through the void, Jassu looked at the growing light and spoke the same truth that had defined everything from the start. They had been told to stay out, and next time, there would be no warning.